Good afternoon, good afternoon. My name is Tim Chapin. I have the honor to be the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy here at Florida State University. I cannot believe we've got this turnout on a Thursday afternoon of the first week of classes. This tells you what a special college I've had the honor to lead and what a special university I have the honor to be a part of. I want to welcome you to our talk tonight on behalf of Florida State University and the college, as well as the Center for Global Engagement. This is part of the college's long-running Shepard Broad Lecture Series, which was funded by a group out of Miami called the Shepard Broad Foundation, aimed at exactly the purpose today is about, bringing international issues to diverse audiences to help raise global awareness and global understanding. I'm particularly proud, this is my 26th year at Florida State University, and one of the reasons that I love this university is we're a local to global university. The college is home to the International Affairs Program, which is, I believe, the second largest in the college and one of the larger ones at the university. We're home to the World Affairs Program, which is the Model UN competition group that travels the country and competes against the Harvards, the Virginias, the Georgetowns, and beats them year after year after year. We're also home at the university to the Center for Global Engagement that does so much for our international students, but also raising awareness about cuisine, culture, language, and so many other things that are near and dear to this university and promote the university as a global institution. We're also home to FSU International Programs, which is a remarkable opportunity for students to travel abroad. I saw Interim Director Lou Blenman earlier. I said, how many students do we send abroad every year? And it's over 2,000. Year after year after year of FSU students that go into the world, expand their global identity, expand their global understanding. This university is about being global because that is not just the now, but very much the future. So we're proud to be part of the global brand at FSU. Before I introduce our speaker, let me tell you a little bit about how the evening's going to go. I've got a few remarks at the front end, and I'll be brief, I promise. I'm then going to introduce President Francis and ask him to come up, and he's got some prepared remarks. And you'll notice we've got a wonderful setting here in which we're going to do some Q&A with the audience. We've got microphones at either side. When we get to that point of the program, we'll invite you to come forward, ask questions of President Francis. I would ask you when we get to that point, and I'll remind you when we get to that point, to please be crisp to your question. I'm sure there'll be lots of them. And let's show them the Seminole spirit, the Seminole pride, and the Seminole respect that we expect of all of ourselves as we get into the Q&A session. Now, let me talk a little bit about the friends that we need to thank for tonight's event. First of all, I need to make sure I thank Dr. Miriam Sheikh, who is a graduate of Florida State University. She received her PhD here. She is the communications director for President Francis, and she is the one that very much made this event happen and opened his eyes to the power and the specialness that is Florida State University. I need to also thank Dr. Steve McDowell, who works in the Provost's office and oversees international initiatives. Steve, your friendship and leadership in the international space are so deeply, deeply appreciated. I need to make sure I thank, because events like this, I get to stand at the podium and pretend like I did all the work when in fact all the work was done by people like Kevin Olson, Chantel Filler, Max Rodriguez, and my Chief of Staff, Tanya Guilford, to put an event on and to host a distinguished visitor like President Francis. So we've got a special day ahead of us, or a special evening ahead of us. I also want to make sure that I thank the Provost, Provost Clark, for attending, and his wife Liz, and the First Lady, Dr. Jay Vardakar, for being here as well. They've just, we're all, many of us, back from Dublin for a wonderful week over there, except for one little thing that we're not going to talk about tonight. We had a spectacular time building FSU's global relationships in Ireland, meeting with educational institutions, business leaders, nonprofits, to make sure that we're telling the FSU global story. Now, let me make sure I hold up the value and the importance of what we're going to be talking about tonight. President Francis is going to be speaking about climate change and sea level rise. This is the defining issue of our species at this time in our species history. And he's going to be speaking with you about that tonight. And we're thrilled that he's engaging in this topic and welcoming questions about that topic. Climate change and sea level rise will affect every one of us, and every one of you, and your kids, and your grandkids, and so on. This is a defining time, as I say, for the species. It is domain agnostic. If you're a sociologist, if you're a metals scientist, if you're a public health person, a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, this will impact you, the work that you do, and the life that you live, and the communities that you raise your family and celebrate with friends. So this is important, serious stuff, and we're thrilled that Dennis Francis, His Excellency, is going to be speaking with us tonight. So now, let me introduce him to you. President Francis is a 40-year diplomat for the beautiful and amazing country of Trinidad and Tobago. He was elected president of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly last fall. He is about to complete his one-year term in that role, and it is an essential leadership role because it leads the General Assembly, helps them tackle the pressing issues of the day, brings together very diverse viewpoints on a whole array of issues, some of them easier to address than others that are very, very impossible to sort of solve quickly. He is a graduate of the University of West Indies in Jamaica and Johns Hopkins as well, where he got his master's degree. He's a distinguished scholar. I would tell that I've had the honor to have a bunch of time with him the last 2 days. He is thoughtful, he is caring, he is insightful. There is great wisdom, great hope, and great ideas that we're going to be hearing about from His Excellency. Let me now proudly introduce President Dennis Francis.
Thank you ever so much, Dr. Chapin, for that warm introduction and thoughtful introduction. Good afternoon, all. Dr. James Clark, Provost of Florida State University, Mr. Tim Chapin, Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy, Dr. Jai Vatikar, First Lady of the University, members of the faculty, students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to join you here today on this renowned Florida State University campus at Tallahassee. I am sincerely thankful to the organizers of the Ruth K. and the Shepard Board International Lecture Series and the Engage Your World Series for the opportunity to do just that, to engage you today on issues of global interest, some existential, but certainly of global importance. I express my deepest gratitude to Assistant Provost McDowell, Dr. John Mayo, the director of the Engage Your World series, and the FSU for the kind invitation. May I also express my appreciation to Dr. Richard McCullough for the warm welcome and the thoughtful remarks he's made when we met earlier this week. We had a very productive and fruitful exchange earlier this week, and I know that if it were possible for him to be here, he would be here. I think you already know, because it was said by the Dean in his introductory remarks, that I have the privilege of counting among my delegation one of my colleagues, Dr. Miriam Sheikh, who's sitting up front. Miriam, would you stand? Who's a national of Pakistan. She's a national of Pakistan and a much valued member of my team. Miriam is also a graduate of this institution. And so it should surprise no one that Miriam has an association with the pursuit of excellence, because that is what this institution teaches. Without any doubt, tertiary institutions like the FSU play a crucial role as society's great developers and liberators of the human potential, advancing public understanding, shaping societies, and building our collective consciousness and future. The future, and what we must do together to secure it, is what I intend to speak with you about today. A transformative future brimming with boundless potential, and one that is propelled by remarkably and rapidly evolving innovations and revolutions that are constantly updating and unleashing our human potential and redefining what is possible. Alongside the boundless potential, the reality is, however, that the future is fraught with profound risks and uncertainties. Risks that we must fully grasp and address immediately in order to ensure humanity's continued well-being. While there are numerous other pressing global issues, including internal conflicts, ongoing aggression against sovereign countries like Ukraine, and escalating violence worldwide in places like Haiti and the Sudan. As you asked me, today's lecture focuses on one of the most formidable risks we face: climate change, a deepening major challenge that is, in fact, existential. It brings a slew of interrelated effects, many spanning borders and all affecting future generations. Our actions today will determine not only the average global temperatures. What we do and what we do not do will heavily influence weather patterns, biodiversity, the frequency and intensity of natural disasters, agricultural output, and food security. Importantly, if we do not seriously examine the way we live, our habits and lifestyles, that will even dictate whether entire ways of life will continue to sustainably thrive or die away. But that will determine our survival. Living up to the promise of the Paris Agreement by honoring those commitments and pledges is our best hope of staving off the worst of the impacts, and more importantly, keeping global temperature rise below the 1.5 degree pre-industrial levels. Some of you might note that I'm wearing the pin. It says 1.5 degrees. Because the Paris Agreement specifies that our best chance of coping with the effects of climate change is to ensure that the ambient temperature of the atmosphere of the Earth does not rise above 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial limits. It is a goal close to my heart, quite literally. And I have taken to wearing a lapel pin advocating atmospheric temperature increase of 1.5 degrees well before I assumed the presidency of the General Assembly. And there's a reason for this. There's a reason for this. The reason being that the 1.5 degree limit threshold is absolutely critical for small island developing states and low-lying coastal areas all over the world. I come from a small island developing state in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. And we are in a sea of small island developing states. I cannot remember the count, but we're not the only ones. You also have the Pacific Island nations and places like Fiji and Guam, which are also small islands that are literally, quite literally, on the front lines of climate change and sea level rise. So these small island states are quite literally the most vulnerable countries to climate change. They're not the only ones. The least developed countries, country like Bangladesh, for example, also has that risk. And so it's very important that we keep our focus, and not just our focus, that we maintain the commitment that was manifest in Paris and that formed part of the agreement to get and maintain the 1.5 degree limit. But I have to tell you, the performance has not lived up to expectation. The Secretary General of the United Nations now speaks about global boiling, not global warming. Global boiling. We are going in a direction opposite to the one we need to be going in. We need to be decarbonizing the atmosphere at high rates with the cooperation of all members of the international community. All 193 must make a contribution. We must share the burden of acting That's saying it all. It's saying it all. But we need to share the burden and the responsibility of acting in ways that will save the planet and will save the civilization that we built. What would be the point of our forefathers having sacrificed so much so that we can live comfortably, but then it's all gone because we failed in our duty to nurture and cultivate it, to save it for the next generation of humans? What would be the point? And so it is a goal that we must all set ourselves urgently to achieve. Sea level rise, global warming, and proliferating disasters, including hurricanes and floods caused by climate change, can no longer be spoken of as abstract, looming dangers. They are present realities, unfolding before our very eyes. In 2024 alone, for the first time ever, global warming breached the 1.5 degree limit for an entire year. July 21 was registered as the hottest day on Earth since record keeping began in 1940. Then the following day, July 22nd, broke that record again. Right here in the United States, 2023 broke the record for the greatest number of deaths resulting from extreme heat. That is, 2,300 people tragically lost their lives in 2023. And 2024 could regrettably even be worse. Extreme weather events caused by warming air and ocean temperatures, once rare, could become annual occurrences, affecting close to 1 billion people living in low-lying coastal areas. As Floridians, you know only too well that climate change is not a tomorrow problem. Just recall how recently Hurricane Debbie, which made landfall not far from here, left a path of massive destruction in its wake, from Florida to the Carolinas. It was another stark reminder of how torrential rains can trigger flash flooding and storm surges. Nearly 40% of Americans live along the coast, where sinking land only adds to the threat of sea level rise. For the populations of small island developing states and other low-lying coastal zones, like those in the Caribbean, no issue is more pressing or consequential than sea level rise. For islands such as the Maldives, which consists of 99% water, ocean that is, and has a maximum elevation of merely 2.4 meters, roughly, that's 6 feet above sea level. Even a modest rise in sea levels could have catastrophic consequences, potentially making continued habitation untenable. In fact, the situation is so dire that in some parts of the world, in the Pacific region in particular, some of the countries there have already concluded agreements with third parties to take their populations if their land should be submerged beneath the sea. Stop for a moment and think about the consequences of that. Culture and heritage lost, national identity lost, issues around the legality of what happens to your submerged land. These are important questions. Starting over in a strange place. And starting over because we, the collective we, neglected to do what could have been done and should have been done to avoid it. In coastal states such as Brazil, from Brazil to India, sea level rise could abruptly force millions of people to relocate, creating new population flows, which itself is a challenge, and intensifying competition for already scarce resources. The cascading effects extend beyond these immediate impacts, influencing regional stability, economic viability, and international relations. Addressing them, therefore, requires a multi-pronged approach, combining urgent climate action to mitigate sea level rise with strategic planning to manage its unavoidable consequences. Building resilient infrastructure, implementing disaster response strategies, including early warning systems, and promoting sustainable economic practices are vital steps towards safeguarding vulnerable communities and ensuring a viable future for affected communities and regions. No less important is implementing effective adaptation measures, inclusive of comprehensive policies that addressed forced migration and displacement due to sea level rise and associated sudden onset and slow onset disasters. Friends, at a broader level, we need to maintain an unrelenting and uncompromising devotion to truth. What a strange remark to make in a place that is the fountain of truth. It's what universities do. They create new knowledge, scientific and other knowledge. They create new truths, not parallel truths. It doesn't exist. We have a name for that. You know the name. So these are not parallel facts. These are facts. To succeed, we need a full-on global coordinated effort. In particular, to push back on the rampant misinformation and disinformation campaigns maliciously spread by those who seek to cast doubt on obvious science-based realities relevant to addressing climate change. And we know very well that this pattern of denial is not new. Just as the tobacco industry once manipulated or outright rejected the scientific evidence linking smoking to cancer, today we see similar tactics motivated by self-interest in relation to climate change. These actors downplay the urgency of climate action. They deny the impact of fossil fuel consumption and excessive carbon emissions, and disregard rising sea levels, even as communities are at imminent risk of relocation. Just in June, it was reported that communities along Panama's Caribbean coast have begun relocating in response to the danger of sea level rise. There are those who deliberately and knowingly dismiss the need for climate action, even as people and our planet continue to suffer the devastating consequences of natural disasters caused by or made more virulent through human activity. These campaigns do more than just mislead the public. They undermine effective policy making, delay the adoption of sustainable practices, and compromise international efforts, including on many occasions causing disunity among countries at the United Nations itself on efforts to address climate change, global warming, and sea level rise. It is imperative, therefore, that we confront these falsehoods with facts and informed discourse in order to ensure that policy decisions are informed by science and evidence. Dear friends, as I conclude, let me emphasize that as academics, you too bear a particular moral responsibility to challenge mistruths, distortions, and outright lies, and to promote the irrefutable facts of science to the general public. It is crucial to ensure that people are properly informed and aware of the real dangers and threats in order to empower them to make their decisions about their lives, in order to empower them to make informed decisions about their individual lives and that of their communities. Moreover, as young people, the next generation of global leaders, who I like to think of as globalists, people who understand that we may live in different countries, but we actually are all connected. That action taken in one place reverberates and affects what happens half a world away. Half a world away. As global thought leaders and globalists, the responsibility will rest on your shoulders to take decisions and to take action on some of these pressing global issues, because we are not going to solve climate change tomorrow. Anyone who gives you that impression is misguiding you. This is going to require a commitment and the will to stay the course for some time. It is going to require us to re-examine our lifestyles, how we use resources, the extent to which we can incorporate green energy in our energy mix so as to minimize the amount of carbon we introduce into the atmosphere. But as gloomy as it might seem, and I'm not a purveyor of gloom, I like to think of myself as a realist. You cannot, and we will not be able to react to the problems that confront us unless we take a very realistic look at what those problems are. We have to be realistic. So as a realist, I can say to you that we have witnessed some encouraging steps, such as the capitalization of the Loss and Damage Fund at COP28 in Dubai last November in the United Arab Emirates. I am hopeful that leaders will build substantially and meaningfully on the progress made at COP29 in November this year in Baku, Azerbaijan. In all our efforts, it is especially crucial to heed the unique risks faced by countries in special situations, those most poor and most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, who contributed the least to the problem of climate change. Climate change is, in fact, a developmental crisis. It's not just about the weather. It is about much more than the weather. It's about quality of life. It's about our rights as human beings to have access to safe, potable water, which incidentally we are running out of very fast. Very fast. You know, there was a point in time when we thought that there was an infinite supply of water. No such truth. Water is becoming a progressively scarce commodity. I'm saying this to you to sensitize you, to start making these small changes in your personal life now. Be careful of how you use water. We have to manage it in order to make it last as long as possible and to keep it available as an asset for future generations. You know, we spent a lot of time and effort trying to determine whether water exists on other planets. And just a couple of weeks ago, NASA announced that they had found evidence of water on Mars. So, but that water is on Mars. We are on the Earth. So we need to act responsibly. That is what being a globalist means. It means taking stock of where you are, when you're here, and what you can do to help to improve the living conditions on the planet and the sustainability of the planet for all times and for all people. In that regard, the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states deserve our full attention and support. There are several immediate ways you can make a difference. For example, I encourage you all to voice your support leading up to the Summit of the Future in September, during which world leaders will convene at United Nations headquarters in New York to forge a new global consensus. Consensus is a big word for agreement. Agreement on strengthening our multilateral system to better serve both people and planet. Why does the multilateral system need strengthening? Because in recent years, it's not been possible to deliver decisions, important decisions on many of these issues. We go to the climate talks and we make grand statements, we make all sorts of commitments, and sometimes the follow-up action does not equate with the commitments given. That is not good for building trust. And people you do not share your most personal thoughts or secrets, nor do you make agreements with people you don't trust. So we have to work on building trust, and we're doing that very much so in the UN. I'm also delighted to inform you that following the summit, the General Assembly, at my initiative, will convene a high-level meeting of heads of state and government on September 25th to tackle the challenge posed by sea level rise. This has never before happened in the United Nations. Sea level rise was not on the radar. Climate change, yes, but people got so consumed with considering the implications of climate change that not a lot of attention was given to sea level rise. And so it's time to change that, because it too is an existential threat that will impact almost every country in the world, large and small. Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, countries in Africa, the Caribbean, the Pacific, It's just extraordinary. This will mark the Assembly's inaugural formal meeting, and it is a crucial step in addressing the whole question of sea level rise, with a view to delivering in time practical solutions for the affected states and frontline communities. These events are critical in raising the international profile on sea level rise and enhancing international collaboration to mitigate and adapt to these risks. You can also support our cause by joining my Choose Sustainability campaign and the Act Now campaign initiated by the United Nations. I'm donning a pin, this one. This is a sustainability pin, because in April of this year, we decided in the General Assembly to host something called Sustainability Week. We wanted to raise public awareness about the urgency with which we need to address and promote sustainability as a viable strategy for stabilizing global climate, reducing the pace of biodiversity loss. You know, when you talk to the fishermen, often they tell you the fish are getting smaller and smaller, and some species have disappeared. Why? Because we've overfished them. The Canadians will tell you. I know that the spouse of the provost is Canadian. I saw this for myself in the Maritimes. They had a thriving cod industry in Canada. Dynamic, thriving cod industry doesn't exist in the same way anymore because we've overfished it. We did not address the issue of sustainability. And so I'd like to challenge all of you to join the Choose Sustainability campaign, because that is going to make a contribution to our longevity on this planet and to addressing some of the challenges we face. Both initiatives are instrumental in influencing all stakeholders, including you, to make decisions that secure a sustainable future. I know that many of you are passionate and have ideas of your own, ideas which I'm eager to hear. With this, I eagerly anticipate learning of your insights, and I am happy to address any questions you may have about how to stabilize our climate and to drive further progress across the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Our blueprint, the blueprint of the United Nations to achieve peace, progress, prosperity, and sustainability for all peoples, without exception, everywhere. Thank you very much.
That. Now we're live. Thank you, Mr. President, for that invigorating and very, very energizing speech. The way this is going to work, dear friends, is we've got microphones on the two aisles over here. We want to encourage you to, if you have a question or one of those big ideas for the President, you're welcome to come up and share that. But I wanted to seed the soil a bit And have you talk about the other pin on your lapel, this the Sustainable Development Goals pin that, and I happen to be wearing one of these because the President gifted this to me earlier. Can you talk just a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals and what they have to do with this, the broader themes of your talk here today, please?
So, is it on? I'll get that one. There you go. By way of context, you would remember that with the new millennium in the year 2000, there was a decision in the UN to work upon something called the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals became the subject of work between the year 2000 and 2010. The performance was mixed. And then the UN decided that we needed a successor to the Millennium Development Goals. And so what was decided was that we would emphasize the urgency and need for sustainable development, because the gap between the rich and the poor globally, rather than closing, was increasing at a ridiculously fast rate. And that gap is not just between rich countries and poor countries, it's also happening in country. The distribution of wealth within countries showed a pattern where large numbers of people had actually been left out of the magic of growth. The conclusion was that as important as globalization had been, it had left some people behind. And so this needed to be addressed, to give everyone a stake in the system. That makes it sustainable. When people have a vested interest in something, when they see that they have opportunities to be their best selves, they're very unlikely to launch a broadside attack to destroy or undermine it. And so the Sustainable Development Goals were decided upon. There's something called Agenda 2030, which is to implement these goals, of which there are 17 by the year 2030. And the Sustainable Development Goals relate to ways and means of closing that developmental gap, of making it more manageable. So, for example, the first SDG says to significantly reduce global poverty, because there are 900 million people now living on this planet who live in abject poverty. They will never, ever be able to get out of that poverty unless we do something different. Then there's another 900 who live in hunger. They do not know where the next meal is coming from. They are unable to feed their kids. They cannot send their kids to school. In many instances, the kids have to go to work in order to help the family to survive. This is happening in many, many countries in the global south. And of course, without an education, your chances are immediately and automatically stultified. You have very little chance of succeeding. You know, we don't take your presence here in this institution for granted. There are many, many places in the world where this cannot happen. So you are, in fact, you might not think of yourself this way, but you're in fact privileged. You're privileged to get, you know, a tertiary education that will launch you into a career that might give you, I hope will give you great fulfillment and satisfaction and a high standard of living. But we cannot assume that this is the case everywhere. It's not. And so the Sustainable Development Goals relate to things like having access to clean, potable water, because in many places in Africa and in India and in Asia, that is not the case. Children cannot consume that water because it's polluted. It's dirty. It creates disease, diphtheria, malaria, all of these things. So there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Things like access to affordable energy, affordable non-polluting energy. This, of course, will help with the green transition to address the climate change issues we were talking about earlier. 17 of them. And if we can manage to get those done by 2030, we would have solved most of the problems of the world.
So we've got about 6 years to fix everything. I'll say with a smile. Yeah, with the goal. So
it was 10.
Yes, right.
But now, because the goals were agreed in 2015 to be delivered in 2030, but we've had setbacks, COVID. Many economies will lock down. After COVID, we've had war, we've had inflation, we've had a confluence of crises, cascading crises, one after the next, that has made the situation somewhat difficult. And so we are way behind now on the Sustainable Development Goals. But as the UN, we are very committed to this because it is the way to lift people up, to give them hope, to be their best selves, to ensure that all of humanity enjoy their inalienable rights as human beings, their human rights, to ensure that women are invested, not are invested, but that society recognizes that women have equal rights and ought to be. Do you know?
Mr. President, I'm going to give you one more minute. We've got a bunch of questions for you.
There's a statistic. Well, you asked me the question, so you got me going on these issues.
So it's my fault, yes.
We can be here until tomorrow, but of course that won't happen. At current rates of change, it would take 265 years, believe it or not, for women functionally to have the same rights as men. Think about that for a minute. In many parts of the world, for example, women cannot lawfully inherit property. It's not permitted in law. So even if their spouses should die, they cannot inherit their spouse's property. That is how entrenched the discrimination is. We've made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go. Still have a long way to go. And of course, spousal abuse and domestic violence continues to be a major issue across all countries and at all levels of society. It accounts for an enormous level of expenditure in hospital and care facilities because women are being abused. Often, this ends up with them being killed by an abusive spouse or boyfriend. So it's high on the agenda of the UN because this is a real problem that confronts society at all levels, big countries and small. And so I'll shut my mouth now and allow you.
I think we're wrapped with attention and we're hearing the insights, but I do want to give voice to our wonderful attendees. To our left here, please, a question for President Francis.
Hello, thank you for being here again, Your Excellency. My name is Miriam Almerhiel, and a question I have is, it's been proven more than 10 years ago that 80% of the Earth's biodiversity is protected by indigenous peoples, and that they have an unrivaled, intimate relationship with sustainability in this manner. If so, how, does the UN General Assembly and your administration in particular look at the study, documentation, and implementation of the indigenous cosmovision and epistemology in the attempt to combat climate change?
Thank you very much for that question. It's a very interesting question. I had a visit, I think about maybe 6 months ago, from a representative of the indigenous peoples of Colombia. And he said to me that I think a decade or so ago, long before I arrived at the UN, there was a decision of the General Assembly to facilitate and take action to allow and increase the participation of indigenous peoples in policy development in the UN. Decision taken, but his complaint was that nothing had happened. Nothing had been done about it. Now, I am one of these people who believe that if a commitment is given, it must be honored. It's a matter of principle. And so I decided that we were going to take this issue up. Long story short, I appointed co-facilitators. These are ambassadors. The ambassador of Canada and the ambassador of Peru, both of which, incidentally, both countries have strong indigenous populations. I appointed them both to co-facilitate a process to determine the mechanisms to engage indigenous peoples. They've just written to me a letter outlining what they have achieved. I haven't been able to study it in detail because it arrived, in fact, just the day before coming here to Florida State University. But I say that to say this, that the UN is ever conscious of the need to include a diversity of voices. People who have information and knowledge and expertise, people whose lives are being directly impacted by policy being developed at the UN, global policy. We want to hear from those people. We want to have their inputs because they have perspectives that we don't have. I've never been an indigenous person. I've read the implications, how it has impacted their lives being indigenous. And you'd be surprised at some of the things. But getting that input has to come from that community. And I'm happy to say that we're taking action. It is not perfect. We're taking action in order to facilitate and encourage the broadening of that kind of dialogue so that policy is informed by the reality on the ground. The best policy you have must address the issues, the salient issues that confront these people. And so that's what we're doing. So thank you very much for the question.
Wonderful question, thank you. We're going to go to the other microphone, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Sarah Hampton. So nuclear power has both decreased and increased in popularity among world leaders, nations, and citizens. Should states continue to invest nuclear power as a meaningful alternative to coal and fossil fuels, despite its high cost of building and general education requirements?
The nuclear question. And I'm the son of a nuclear engineer, so I'm interested to hear your answer.
No, am I. I'm not a nuclear engineer. This is a big discussion in the UN, nuclear power. Now, the fact is that there are many important domestic uses, practical applications of nuclear power. It would amaze you. Of course, the obvious things are in medicine. But nuclear power has been used in agriculture, in global emergency warning systems. It's everywhere. Domestic uses. But I have a feeling that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, and what that means for the safety and stability of the world. Well, I once wrote a statement in which I said that escalation of nuclear weapons breathe escalation. Because the theory is, you see, the theory is MAD, mutually assured destruction. MAD. Think about it. If destruction is mutually agreed, what's the point? What is the point? We're going to destroy each other. What's left? Nothing. There is a strong movement towards denuclearization. I don't anticipate that it is something that will happen in short order. I can tell you that the long-term safety and security of the world is for denuclearization to take place. Now, we do not have, unfortunately, we do not have good examples. Because guess what? Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons voluntarily about 10 years ago. Perhaps if they had kept it, they would not have been invaded. Perhaps. We do not know. And so this is the theory. The theory is deterrence, that it deters aggression on the part of other states. But then you get into a race. There's a counter at the UN. We count it. I think it's malfunctioned. But it's very, very chilling to stand in front of that machine and watch it count the amount of money being spent by the minute on securing nuclear arms. It's shocking. Shocking. And then you compare that to what is being spent on sustainable development, and you realize where the priority lies for many countries. Nuclear, I had the good fortune to visit Japan earlier this year. And I met and spoke to a lady, an elderly lady. She was 88 years old. She was a child when the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. And she remembers. She's devoted her entire life to traveling the world to stop the growth of nuclear weapons. And I've seen the photographs, the devastation, the harm, and the damage that it does, not just to structures, but to human beings. The thousands of maimed people. And I can just imagine the mental and psychological scarring that takes place. This cannot be in the best interests of humanity. It cannot. It might be a good short-term defense mechanism, but ultimately it creates real problems for civilization.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. I'm going to keep us moving here. Our next question, please.
I do believe you are genuine in your goals for humanity. However, I must admit that the UN feels like a distant entity for the people in our communities. So how can we unite the people of our communities and the UN to fight climate change together?
Well, let me say this first of all. The UN is an enemy of no one. No one. In fact, the role of the UN is to bring the enemies together, for a dialogue, because our philosophy is that conflict and wars cannot be solved by shooting at each other. You need to sit around the table and talk and negotiate. With respect to the more substantive question that you asked about how the UN is working, for example, we are having the Summit of the Future coming up this year in September. The UN convened a special meeting in Nairobi, Kenya in May of this year in order to allow civil society, groups and individuals to make an input, to make a contribution to that conference. Because we know that there is a body of work and knowledge that has been created by these organizations, working in the field on these very problems for decades and decades. The UN makes no pretense about having a monopoly on expertise. We seek it where it is. It's one of the reasons, for example, that the Secretary General, because of course in 2024, we cannot deny the increasing power and relevance of artificial intelligence. But as productive as it is, there are aspects to it that can be challenging and create risks. So the Secretary General, in his wisdom, knowing that the UN will inevitably have to deal with AI, which it is doing in the context of the Summit of the Future, appointed a high-level global team to advise us. And that team includes scientists, ethicists, psychologists, anthropologists. It's the best of the best from across the world in order to get those inputs as guidance for how can we best harvest the promises of AI, but without unduly exposing society to the downside risks that could in fact divide the society. So go up on the website for the Summit of the Future. In fact, if you want to become involved, there's something called Action Days, the Saturday and Sunday. I think it's the 20th and 21st. Saturday and Sunday, it's all devoted to young people. Go up on the website, you'll be able to contribute to the discussions remotely and make your voices heard. Because we want them, we need them. You are tomorrow's leaders. You have insight, and we value that insight.
Mr. President, we have time for one last questions over here. Over here for this young lady, please.
Hello, my name is Aura Cha, and my question is, as the UN President, what do you do for the children who need clean water?
What do I do
For the children of?
Something about clean water?
What do you do for the children who need clean water?
Thank you.
A great closing question, Mr. President.
Yes. Well, as I was saying before, we are running out of water. We need to manage water wisely. The agency that deals with children's issues is called UNICEF. UNICEF. And UNICEF has offices in several countries. They've got regional offices, and then they've got offices in individual countries. And they develop programs to address specific issues regarding children in those countries. Someone just sent me an article. The head of the United Nations Environment Program just sent me an article today. The thrust of the article is that climate change is actually undermining the human rights of children. because they are having to grow up without, in many cases, a safe and potable supply of water. And because with the flooding and extreme climate events, they have to be kept out of school for a rising number of days each year. So we're trying, first of all, to teach kids and their parents, but you know, as a matter of strategy, it's wise to teach the kids first, because then the kids take the lessons home to their parents about how to wisely manage water, not to waste it. In many, many parts of the world, drought is a reality across Africa right now. They do not have sufficient water. People are dying due to drought, including babies, young children. It's something that we are continuing to work on to ensure that the humanitarian agencies, the people who are responsible for assisting and supporting populations in distress, that they get the needed help and support that is necessary. But it's a challenge because of the large demand, the number of people, and often because of the political dynamics of the situation where guns are blazing, so it makes it very difficult for humanitarian workers to have the kind of access that they need to deliver these services. But thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
As I bring this to a close, I want to hold up for you that for the students in the room, there are many courses across the entire university. I'm sure that every college has coursework that touches on the issues that have been brought up today. We could do Q&A for hours and hours and hours. We unfortunately don't have time for that. I want us to make sure we give a robust, seminal thank you to President Francis for his great talk today and his time meeting with us. It was an honor, sir, for you to have you speak with this community. So please, a nice round of applause for our dear guest. And President Francis, you as I've got to know you the last day, you're very much an optimist. You believe in the future. I'm going to give you 1 minute, and 1 minute only, to give us a closing message about the joyful future that you have been speaking about the last day with us.
Create your own future, or at least help to create a future in which you can take pride by acting as responsible global citizens, understanding that you have a capacity to bring about change. You can be empowered to effect change in the system that would address the need for us to take stock of where we are and to change things in a way that helps the climate, helps the issue of biodiversity loss, helps, for example, the issue of antimicrobial resistance. Many of you may not know that we are running out of antibiotic drugs because they are becoming less and less effective. And something has to be done about it because 5 million people are losing their lives each year to this problem. If we don't do something about it, the numbers will rise precipitately. And so I challenge you all. You're young. You have your entire lives ahead of you. Understand that as young people, you have the power to effect change. Act globally. Act sustainably. And choose sustainability. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, sir.